I'm going to introduce Brooke Bryan here, who is our Associate Professor of Writing and Digital Literacy. She's the chair of the writing program. More recently, she's become the Dean of Innovation and Applied Liberal Arts. So she's going to be the MC for the event and lead us through the agenda and the presentations for the seniors. So go ahead, Brooke.
Thank you, April. Welcome, hello and welcome, friends and family of Antioch College's class of 2020. This is a group of young people that's very close to many of our hearts. We thank you for sharing them with us for their journey through Antioch College. And I imagine that no one would have expected that we would be here virtually in Colloquia together, but we are really glad that everyone decided to join with us so that we could find some way of celebrating their work and their accomplishments during their time at Antioch. So today, every student will be introduced by their faculty advisor, their capstone advisor, who has worked with them through their senior project requirements, and in many cases worked with them over their long haul through their entire Antioch experience. They will be introduced, and then the student will have 5 to 7 minutes to talk about their capstone work or recent work that they're really excited about. And then we will take from the chat 2 questions for each participant. So if you have questions that arise while a person is presenting, you can add your questions into the chat bar, and another moderator will read 2 of those questions that come up. So thank you again for being here for our 2020 Colloquia to celebrate the work of this graduating class of seniors. It's a really spectacular cohort. It's a group of people who have made an incredible impact on Antioch College, who have helped create what it is today and what we will be tomorrow as we keep growing into the vision that they've helped establish. So thank you for being here. Our first presenter today is Athina, who will be introduced by Sean. Sean, take it away.
All right, great, thank you. Hi, I'm Sean Payne, Associate Professor of Political Economy, and I'm introducing Athina Peterson. Athina's project is titled Hoops You Have to Jump Through, the Experience of Marginalized Students at Antioch College. Athina's self-designed major is Critical Race and Economic Justice. Athina's senior project aims to develop a better understanding of the lives of marginalized students through semi-structured peer-to-peer interviews in a community-based participatory research framework. So Athina, why don't you tell us about your research? You know, what were you looking at in this project?
So my project aims to develop a better understanding of the lives of marginalized, racialized students through semi-structured peer-to-peer interviews using community-based participatory research, peer-to-peer interviews, using to strengthen and forge relationships among members of the Antioch community. There were 5 participants that I conducted one-on-one interviews with. The participants in these interviews identified as one or multiple of the selected homogeneous group, which was Black, POC, and or Native students. As a researcher, it's important to acknowledge that I'm an insider, which is someone that has a pre-existing relationship with the community while conducting this research, that I'm conducting the research on and with. I also share commonalities with the research participants, and by having a rapport with the participants, it made my research feel more authentic and allowed for more trust and appreciation between me and the researchers, or the researched people. All the participants were aware of their rights, and they were given the information of my advising committee to hold me accountable for anything they didn't feel as though I conducted in their best interest. And they all agreed to it, and I conducted the research in those parameters. Yeah, and basically what I had was an interview schedule. It was a series of questions, basically asking the interviewees where they were from, what they like to do on and off campus, how their families felt about them attending the institution, how they felt about attending the institution, a typical day for them on the campus, and their future plans, etc. After the interviews were recorded, I transcribed them using a thematic analysis and coding, which was flexible and allowed me to recognize themes and domains. and to help me identify, differentiate, and classify details, events, ideas, and experiences. So yeah, that's what I did.
Athina, what were your reasons for pursuing this research?
As we know, or at least we should know, college is really important in the development of marginalized and racialized communities. It offers people in these communities voices to combat racism, combat economic inequalities, and be intolerant to intolerance. The aim of my overall project was for Antioch as a whole to have a better understanding of the lives of marginalized and racialized students on campus. It benefits the students who are in the parameters of my research and also the entire campus and the experience of future marginalized and racialized students on our campus using my research. So yeah, that's why I did it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your coding process and the domains and themes you were able to pull out of your interviews?
Okay, so there were 4 domains. Just kidding. Yeah, there were 4. There's 4. Okay, so there were 4 domains that I used to separate data collected in the verbatim transcriptions. These domains were lack of transparency and trust in administration, social engagement, students' perceived agency. That's 1. Okay, and then the curriculum offered at Antioch College, the quarter system, and then finances, scholarships, and funding. These were overarching themes that continued to be prominent in the research I conducted and in the interviews. And a lot of the themes fell within the domains, and these domains were used to tie in an overwhelming amount of research. So, yeah.
Your title is very evocative. Hoops you have to jump through. Is there a story behind that?
Yeah, okay. So in my very first interview, the interviewee kept using the phrase hoops you have to jump through, or hoops to jump through, pertaining to the experiences and the adversity she had faced on Antioch's campus. At first, since it was my first interview, I didn't think it was relevant. However, hoops to jump through became an overarching phrase to describe the experiences of marginalized, racialized students on campus. The phrase is not only eye-catching, it's just vague enough that it addresses the entirety of my project, but it also provides like insight into students' perceived agency on Antioch's campus.
Right. So what would you like people to walk away with from your work? Like, what are the big takeaways from your research?
So students have both negative and positive attributes because of their attendance at Antioch College, or like our college. Students feel as though their journey at Antioch is coming to an end quicker than they intended on it because of lack of transparency the school has given to them. Some students have already graduated and moved on from Antioch, but are still able to look back and acknowledge their experiences. The positives at Antioch were definitely that the school offers unbeatable scholarships in order to attend the university. This is huge. This is a huge accomplishment done by our institution, considering some of these students wouldn't have been able to attend a college or any college if not for the institution's amazing scholarships. The students also gained relationships with like-minded peers, faculty, and staff. And even during times where the students felt as though the institution has failed them, faculty and staff stepped up and used their positions as tools to aid students. Students like the buildings on campus, they appreciate the resources they do have. However, students don't appreciate the lack of transparency that they perceive as a lack of funds for activities, the lack of the curriculum they need in order to graduate from our school and continue attending Antioch. And they feel as though the administration is just completely disconnected and makes it hard to communicate with them. So I feel as though that's like the overarching discovery in my project, or like my research. And I think that all in all, students feel as though the school is doing some things well and other things they need to change in order for Antioch to retain students who are marginalized and racialized and have a comfortable environment for those students to prosper with social capital and the knowledge they intended on receiving at Antioch College. So.
Okay, my last question for you. You started planning this research back in winter quarter before the world basically changed. So can you tell us about how the COVID pandemic affected your research?
So, dear Rona. Well, COVID definitely affected my research in that I wanted to conduct these interviews face-to-face, I wanted to also have field notes be implemented throughout my research. I wanted to have way more people I can conduct research with. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic limited who I could have interviews with my time constraint. So the people who ended up reaching back out to me were all women, which I didn't want it. I wanted my research to be more inclusive, but unfortunately that's just how it panned out. I'm really grateful to the people I did get to interview. However, how I want to expand that is be able to interview more people, have a more inclusive interview process with more people who will be included in this, who are not just women identifying. And also to be able to have that face-to-face and have field work, because I feel as though that would have made my research that much more cool. So yeah.
All right. Thank you, Athina. I think we have a couple minutes for questions left over.
We do. There was a question about, I'm combining two questions from Lou about how are you planning to share your research? And then Rob Hollister had a question about what recommendations do you advocate for how Antioch can improve the experience of students of color and other marginalized groups?
Well, definitely throughout the interview process, from me just regurgitating what I got from my interviewees, is that the school can be more transparent. The administration can be more involved with student life. There needs to be some type of connection that's built between students and forge that relationship so students feel as though they can come to the administration and they understand their rights and what they have access to on campus. I also feel as though throughout the interview process that students really do appreciate faculty and staff. And I feel like that's something the school is doing well. And maybe if they could take some hints from their faculty and staff, meaning the administration, then Antioch will be better overall for marginalized and racialized students. And also too, it's gonna be my senior project, my final paper. So I wanna send it in the school. I don't know where yet, but it's a paper. So that's
okay,
it.
and then Ben asked, did you look at overall attrition rates and why do students leave? Some of that I think you've touched on, but he was asking specifically.
No, at first that was going to be what I did as my senior project. However, I wanted to look more into the actual experiences of marginalized, racialized students on this campus. So I kind of moved away from just specifically focusing in on retention rates, because being able to identify and understand the experiences of these students will be able to understand why they stay and why they leave. So, yep.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Athina. It's so great to hear about your work. And for everyone watching, moderating questions is our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Kevin McGruder. Thank you both so much. So next up, we have Tom, who will be introduced by his capstone faculty, Casselli.
There we go. It wouldn't let me unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hello, I'm Michael Casselli, Chair of the Arts Division and Professor of Sculpture and Installation at Antioch College, also an alumnus from 1987. Today we're going to hear from Tom on his self-designed project, Audio Production in the Collaborative Arts. Tom's senior project is a culmination of his work and his interest in sound as a creative medium and the reemergence of Anti-Watt Radio, a decentralized community-based radio station. Anti-Watt existed as a student-operated radio station prior to the closing in 2008. Although its physical infrastructure disappeared during the hiatus, the intentions driving the station persevered with the rebirth of the college in 2011. Through the process of physically reconstructing Anti-Watt, Tom seeks to engage concepts of institutional memory, communication infrastructure, and interdisciplinary collaboration. This project is an ongoing effort between various alums, staff, students, faculty, and Yellow Springs community members. Tom, take it away.
Hey everyone. Um, Here I am on the beach in Ohio. Yeah, I think to kind of contextualize the project a little bit, I need to kind of talk about my history with audio, my personal history with audio production. And I kind of got into it at YSO when I was actually still in high school. And how I got into it was actually by literally just walking into the studio and expressing interest. And they were very supportive and invited me to come back. And I went back and I went through all their community voices programming and everything, and learned the bulk of, or developed the foundation there. And so that kind of that experience of being kind of brought in and supported. When I just showed up one day, essentially, really kind of made me value supporting people whenever they express interest in this kind of thing in whatever they want to do with it. And unfortunately, radio is a very radio and broadcasting is a very technical thing that's hard to break into and hard to be supported in. And so I kind of became interested in ways to undo that, so that people who are not historically supported in their endeavors as I am, could have a way in and experiment and do stuff and work on community projects. So I eventually purchased a really dinky little FM transmitter and learned about anti-watt from some current faculty that were working at Antioch and students that had actually taken the project back up. Louise Leibrook, Garen Svoboda, and Eric Rhodes had kind of, who are all students that came in after the reopening. They had found out about the history and were kind of trying to get it going again, but they were all getting ready to graduate. And so they were kind of looking to pass the project along. And they, the people that expressed interest were, at the time, were me, Michelle Deleon, who graduated last year, and Ty Clapsaddle. And, many more people have been involved since, but we got this little FM transmitter and started broadcasting shows that were happening on campus, and broadcasting Camelot. Very basic technical understanding of how to do it. It was mostly just for fun. And then I got involved with Antioch alum Pete Treatish, who, for those of you who may not know, was involved with Prometheus. Was one of the founders of Prometheus Radio Project, and they fought a 20 or 30-year battle to get LPFM radio stations, which stands for low power FM radio stations, a spot on the FM frequency. And basically what that meant was that small community groups that don't have the funding, don't have $100,000+ to drop on a new full power station and the licensing and everything that goes with that, could have a way to start a station and do that work within their community. And so for one of my co-ops, Pete and I drove across the country. We went to Chicago. We did work on Anti-Watt in Yellow Springs. We did work on multiple stations in Philadelphia, 2 in Alabama. We went all the way down to Houston and then drove from Houston all the way back to Philly nonstop. And that was pretty wild. And I learned a lot of technical information. I developed a lot of technical skills during that time to in terms of how to actually, set up both FM and internet stations. Kind of while this was happening, Ty Clapsaddle, who also graduated last year, was taking a class with Casselli. And together, those two developed a, working with another Antioch alum, Matt Baya, who owns and operates servers, private servers. Together, they actually set up the internet radio stream. So while I was kind of off on this FM tangent with Pete Treatish, Ty and Casselli were kind of working on this, on setting up the internet stream, and Michelle was working on programming, and it was all starting to kind of come together. And so flash forward to now, I kind of made it my senior project to finish once and for all the Antioch station build that we had tried to finish over the course of basically the entire time I've been at school here. And we kind of had to switch gears at the last minute. What the plan was we were going to have a physical station in one spot, and then it was going to, disseminate from this other location in the Art and Science building. But now nobody is on campus. So we kind of had to switch gears. And because of all this COVID stuff happening, what ended up happening was we built a radio station that anyone with an internet connection anywhere in the world can DJ from. So last night, for example, I did a show from my bedroom. And, people were listening in and texting me, and it was really fun. Tomorrow night at 7:00 for one of Catalina Jordan Alvarez's class, we are going to stream the final class and talk about the student projects. You can listen in on antiwatt.org or 105.3 FM in Yellow Springs. And so yeah, it's kind of coming together. There's one of the interesting things right now is just that kind of navigating, kind of bringing it back to my original kind of set of values that informed this project, being, how can somebody like my high school self just walk in and be supported and get involved? Because that's really what was informing the desire to do this kind of work. And so that's kind of where the project is at right now, is how do we make it accessible? How do we grow it? How do we, get people involved? And I think that's kind of, that's why I talk about it as an ongoing collaborative effort. So yeah, I'm curious to see if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to just move on.
Now there are a couple questions. Catherine Jordan asks, do you know Nan Rubin from the class of 72, who's now in Las Cruces? She's working on a low watt radio station, and she is one of the mothers of community radio.
I have heard the name before, and I've actually been encouraged to reach out. And I plan to. I haven't reached out yet. It's kind of interesting as I've finished this, as I've gotten to this point in this project. Well, at one point in the project earlier on, it felt like I couldn't find anybody that had any institutional knowledge of Antioch at all, or any, and so it was kind of interesting and difficult in that, and it felt like we were, reinventing the wheel. And now that I'm like getting to this point in the project, all of a sudden there's all these people, probably because of the visibility of it, but there's all these people that are like, oh yeah, like today, for example, Antioch College posted my Colloquia little blurb, and someone was like, yeah, the original anti-watt transmitter was in my dorm room. And so now I know who was like one of the first people doing this. And so I intend to make those connections and reach out to all these people. And if anybody knows of anybody else that I should talk to, please send them my way.
And then following up with that, and if you look in the chat, Catherine has her contact information. She says she can connect you with Nan Rubin.
Great, beautiful.
And then a second question came from Forrest. He's asking, what do we need to do to DJ a show?
So the next step right now that I'm working on with other people is we're putting together a zine actually, and a kind of an an instructional slash kind of, just like historical zine to kind of disseminate. It'll be posted on the Antioch website, so anybody can go there and download the PDF. And the technical information will be in that zine, so that, the idea is that what we have is this kind of decentralized communications network, really. And so, what's to stop another alum in Portland, Oregon from throwing down for another decoder and a transmitter and antenna and setting up another FM signal there, so that, when I'm streaming from my bedroom, we have, anyone can connect to it on the internet, and, the people in Portland and people in Yellow Springs have access to this radio station. And it can be like a really large, and it just has a lot of potential. It's the hardware. The way Ty and I were talking about it on the phone the other day is, what has happened so far is the hardware has been built, and how people choose to use that hardware is up to them, and it's not up to anybody really to dictate or pressure or legislate how they use it. It's been interesting to try to, it's really something that's been a learning process for me is, a goal here is to keep this as non-hierarchical as possible, so that people feel like they can just get involved. What I've learned is that when you're doing that, it can be hard, especially at places like Antioch. It can be really difficult to keep a project going. It can lose steam if you don't make decisions and choose structures yourself. And so that's been a really interesting process, and we've kind of I think we've found a really nice balance where we kind of like we built in just enough structure for as long as we have for the past 4 years, really, that now there's enough people involved that it's just kind of starting to click. And as that happens, as more people get involved, more people will be able to reach out to them and get involved themselves. And it becomes exactly what we wanted it to be, which is a decentralized, non-hierarchical communication structure that anybody can experiment with.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks, Casselli. Next, we have Caitlyn, introduced by Arts Faculty Forrest.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to introduce Caitlyn Bove, who started this quarter with a totally different project and had to completely invent a new project. Caitlyn is a poet and a teacher, and had developed a project to work with high school students as like a poetry workshop, and was going to put out a book of their poems, and then was unable to meet with students. And so ended up really reinvesting in their own writing and their own poems, and kind of some of it was pulling from poems from the past, and a lot was writing new poems this spring, and has put together a chapbook of poems, and is going to share a few with us now. So I'll turn it over to Caitlyn.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I unmuted myself. I think it worked. So as Forrest said, I had to come up with a completely new project, which was kind of difficult and upsetting, especially since I was very, very, very excited to work with the high schoolers. I was working as a math tutor there these last 2 years, and it was like the best job I've had thus far. And then we were ripped apart, but that's okay. We'll email each other soon. And so, yeah, here's my little book. It's titled While Feeling Brave, by me. And I didn't do this cover art. It was by she's a German artist, and I just like had the image on my computer for 8 years or something, and I loved it. So yeah, the first poem that I'm going to read is titled May 5th. All of the poems that I wrote during this quarter just have the dates that I wrote them as the title, because it felt like really hard to try to come up with a title for so many poems while also writing the poems. It was just like so much work for my mind. And yeah, I don't know, I just like commemorating things by their dates, I guess. So here's May 5th. Last weekend, I cut myself a new pair of bike shorts, and Mila and I biked through a too crowded park, watched ducklings cross single file. That's what caught her eye, the line. How'd they know to do that, the tiny little things? It feels like I could write volumes of just things that I want, like one of those tiny ducklings, or an iron stomach, or infinite bike shorts, an endless game of association. See if I can remember where we began. This morning we're somewhere blue and humming. More Atlantic than Pacific, if proximity to the ocean was a metaphor for how much one misses one's friends. I feel the sun on my skin, mid-thigh to where my sock ends, a faded ladybug where something lucky should go, a faded ladybug from winter last year, more of a scar than a token, more discomfort than one would hope for while feeling brave. A slowed down version of believe and chapped lips greet me now, like the sun on my calf, like Sunday and the blues. This is kind of strange because I don't, not that I need applause, but it's kind of, you know, like a signal to stop or go, and I don't hear anything. Thank you, Brooke. I can see, that's good. I can see your hands. Next, I wanted to read these two shorter poems that I wrote. One is before I came to Antioch, but like in Ohio, which was one of the big reasons why I went to Antioch, just because Ohio has rain and I'm from LA, and I was like, oh my God, the rain. So this one is called Selfie in a Spoon, 2016. In a sister-stolen shirt, I sit, blending with the denim. A silver soup container contains my face, my skin, my shoulders. They're red and scratch. The muscles hidden beneath silk and sweat. A hand, my hand, tinted sometimes by paint or blood. Now I don't remember if I used this spoon or not. For eating, that is. And then next to that in the book is this poem that I wrote while on my first co-op, because I was in New Hampshire and I had a friend who was graduating from Northampton High School. So he invited me to prom with him because I was having a really bad time on my co-op. And so he brought me away to Northampton for 2 days for prom, which was interesting. And I found a photo from that I am sharing in the chat if I can, because it's really something. Or I can't put it in the chat, but I'll find a way to show you guys sometime. So I'm just gonna read that poem anyway. It's called Mountain Spring 2017. My curly-haired, pretentious, depressed friend asked me to go to prom with him. I said yes, willingly. I found that deep in my Google Docs and I was very surprised. That it would be fun to include it in the book. And this is the last poem that I decided before, well, one that I want to share. And also in the book, I have some photos that correspond with poems. So this is one of those poems that has a corresponding photo, which is really exciting. So this one's titled May 8th, 2020. May 18th, my bad. I'm trying to come up with a way to write about my cat's vomiting in a poem. This brings my mind around to my birthdays. On my 16th, I threw up on the 101 outside my mother's car while she drove me to work. On my 17th, I drove all the way down the 5, waited a couple of hours for a hike and a smile, I wore my sister's Vans and a red dress gone to the free store. On my 18th, I rode an hour down 675 South, woke up in the arms of a douchebag, and the next day pierced my nose. On my 19th, I rode shotgun for an hour down the 675 South, woke up in the arms of another douchebag, and the next day, and the next day, and the next, I bit my tongue to bits, my teeth still stained. On my 20th, I went down West Fairfield Pike toward 4637. For years awaited fried chicken and mac, fire all around. On my 21st, I spent the afternoon in Koreatown on South Lafayette Boulevard. Woke up to my cat vomiting on my computer on the bed, a common alarm, wishing to wake up on my next birthday somewhere out east, in the arms of someone I love. And then there's this picture of my cat on my bed. The big cat, whenever I'm watching something on the computer, she likes to nuzzle the laptop, and sometimes she decides that what we're watching isn't up to par, so she will play with the mouse and change it. And it's super fun, but I hate that they vomit all the time. I don't know what my timestamp is, but I can do questions or something.
Ben Zeitzman has a question. He asks, how does your voice as a poet differ from your voice as a person? What do you do to your experience to create poetry? What's effaced, amplified?
Okay, that is a great question, Ben. So how does my voice differ from my I like to tell stories or just like talk about funny things that I've learned or experienced. And so that's kind of what my poems turn into, is like poetic storytelling a little bit almost. But when I tell stories in real life, kind of like I'm doing now, I ramble for a long time. And to me, it doesn't seem like I'm doing it for a long time, but then I do notice that I lose people. So then in my poems, I just feel like I ramble less, which may be good, maybe bad. I guess that's up to y'all. And what do you do to your experience to create poetry? I like to write poems outside. That's where I feel most comfortable doing anything most of the time.
And Marianne has a follow-up question. She says, building on or turning around Ben's question, what does creating poetry do to your experience of the world?
Due to my experience of the world. Just creating poetry due to my experience of the world. I think it helps me, like especially right now, if I write poems, you know, just in my journal, just for me, about things that are affecting me personally and specifically, then I can use my voice and my platform and like other, you know, space in my brain to like express other ideas that need to be heard more than, you know, like my cat's vomit everywhere. Like there's a lot more important stuff going on in the world. So if I write it down in my notebook, then it's like gone from my head and I can focus on things that are better for everyone and not just myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your works with us, Caitlyn. I hope we can get our hands on your book. Next, we have Michelle de León, which I am so proud to be able to introduce. Michelle's self-designed major is articulated methodologies in migration studies, and I have been able to work with Michelle over a long haul of how this work has come together ever since I was a co-op faculty member, and Michelle and I were actually able to meet each other in Rome when Michelle received some Mellon Foundation funding for undergraduate research around migration studies. So this is a project, her capstone project is called Office Dynamics, the space between culture shock, personal conflict, work ethic and everyday crisis. And I will let Michelle tell us about this work and how it came to fruition over the long view of her multiple co-ops at Antioch. Michelle, are you with us?
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. I really appreciate you, and I feel like it's very special for you to introduce me at this time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle Deleon, and I am, I mean, technically I'm graduating right now. I just got my transcript officially done, but I actually have been very much interested in interdisciplinary methodologies in anthropology and history. I worked really closely with my academic advisor, Kevin Magruder, Brooke, Bryan, Emily Simons, who is a professor of anthropology, Jennifer Grubbs, who is also someone I work really closely with, Richard Krantz, Shane Creeping Bear, Garrett Louima. There's so many people that I worked with in thinking of these different co-ops. This project is kind of like a space, I call it a working document because it really is like connecting my personal reflections with the theories that I've read, including Giorgio Amoghad's paradox of sovereignty, and even thinking about dabbling with ideas of cultural identity in a settler colonial state like the United States. So my parents came to the US from Guatemala in the 80s, and I was born here, and it's kind of caused a lot of chaos in my life to think about. And so my time at Antioch was really dedicated to learning what it meant to be a displaced person in the United States, and also what it might mean in different places. My first co-op that I did was in Rome. I was an au pair for an Italian family, but I was also interviewing refugees and immigrants about their experience living in Rome. And so that's something that I've been developing and working on, and actually still in the process of indexing these interviews with Brooke, Bryan. And so that's been a long process. It's been about 3 years since I started that. And I mean, I've always wanted to work in Central America or in Southern Mexico. Actually, one of the first things I ever said to Rick Krantz when I and my Befa, Alexandria Montgomery, were at the mixer with the Mills Hotel, was yeah, we want to go to these places, and Mexico is definitely on our list. And so I think it was kind of a cumulative thing, just always thinking about when is this going to progress, or when I was going to be able to do more research. And I accepted a position as a intern that was for 6 months at the program called Defensa Integral de Justicia en Migraciones, which is the integral defense of justice in migration. I worked for Voces Mesoamericanas. I kind of talk about that in this paper, which is connecting autoethnographic, I would say flash piece memoir style things, and some of my even recollections or field notes when I'm reading critical theory more than anything else. And that's I call it a working document. And it also involves actual footage or interesting pieces what does a closed interview form look like in these detention centers, which is something that is very new in Mexico. And also we'll try to be piecing together some other things, because honestly, this process of writing was really difficult, because I think I had just found out that the borders between Mexico and the US and Guatemala were going to close. So it really disrupted a lot of process, and the last few months have been just me trying to pull those things together. I was thinking about reading the piece that I have on here for y'all to hear, and maybe take some questions, if that's okay.
You have 4 minutes.
Oh, I have 4 minutes. Okay, well,
please do read
something. I'm gonna read this thing. From August 2019 to February 2020, I spent 6 months in the high mountains of Chiapas to complete the last co-op of my undergraduate degree at Antioch College. The bordering state was disputed between Mexico and Guatemala for centuries, yet its peoples, languages, and customs draw from Mayan, Olmec, and other indigenous heritage in the Mesoamerican diaspora. The high mountains of area near San Cristobal de las Casas are home to thousands of Zapatista communities that defend the rights of indigenous peoples to self-determination, environmental laws, protections, and conservation of indigenous cosmological customs. Southern Mexico offered so much in such a short, compact amount of time. The mental and emotional work has been much more dense than some of the technical and cultural barriers I was expecting to confront externally. From volunteering for one of the only organizations in the nation to work closely with displaced peoples and their family members, to filtering the saturation that comes with internships in a white savior tourist destination like San Cristobal de las Casas, I can be honest and say I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I booked my flight to Mexico City in the summer of 2019. The following account is just like a personal, my personal reflection. Voces Mesoamericanas is an organization that has been in San Cristobal de las Casas for over 10 years. Their mission statement, along with their programs, have expanded and developed over this time. Although I do not claim to capture their vision of Voces or the visions of those who work there, I do reconcile some of the questions that many of us have when doing God's work. At the moment, there are 3 departments of Voces that have distinct programs with indigenous communities in the high mountain and jungle regions of Chiapas and transnational migrants in southern Mexico, including Autogestión Organizativo de Poblaciones Indígenas Migratorias, Niñas y Niños Indígenas Migrantes, and Defensa Integral para la Justicia y Migraciones. For the past 6 months, I've been working with 2 lawyers in the Department of Defense. They accompany cases of migrant disappearances in northern Mexico and southern United States. Defense also offers legal support to transnational migrants, some who are still being detained in Mexican detention centers in the state of Chiapas. When I initially talked to the lawyers who run the program called Integral Defense of Justice and Migration, we did a WhatsApp call the week before the 2019 spring quarter at Antioch College would end. It was about 4 p.m. I was living in an upstairs room in Case Commons. I eagerly awaited the phone call and dim lighting of my room on the south side of campus. I could feel the warmth outside, the dusty, dingy carpet that trapped heat and anxiety through the floorboards. Though I shut my door, I left the window open and nodded my marine blue curtain to see the sunset. Just the idea of dusk gave me a breath of fresh air. I was emotional, I was nervous, I was naive, but I was honest. I wanted to come to Voces for a 6-month internship in their office, setting my work hours to 5 days a week, between 6 and 8 hours a day, depending on the workload. As I'll explain later in this reflection, balancing between the urgency of my professional, personal, and academic duties often clash. As dramatic as that sounds, these static moments were numbing, often leaving me to cipher and uncipher my priorities in ways that I had been avoiding for years. Chiapas is close enough to Guatemala that I could visit my family and reflect on what the Mayan diaspora looks like. Being technically Mexican territory, it also took off the pressure of feeling like I didn't belong because I already knew I wasn't Mexican from the start. Many people born in the US with family heritage elsewhere look for a revelation in the motherland, a home in the constellations. For me, it has been one of the most vulnerable mental and physical spaces to exist in. At times, I wish I could escape the figurative tabs of my worries and privileges, and the gritty details that leave me indebted, like owning a passport, owing a loyalty to an ideological mindset that didn't leave me feeling less empty as if I were to reject it. Rebuking comes with repulsion. The lukewarm concepts I once knew couldn't be doused in guilt and housed by fear anymore. So that's just like an introduction to like the personal reflections that I have in this longer paper.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We would love to hear more of your work. Some of your images, Forrest says in the chat, are available at the sort of digital exhibit for Colloquia. And if everyone could consider questions and hold them to the end, we should have a few minutes towards the end for questions for Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm so proud.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Truth, who Casselli will introduce.
Hello again. So I am one of Truth's advisors. He has a number, myself, Kevin Magruder, David Kamler. His self-designed title is Hip Hop Education. I put this on as a subtext, Truth Flowing with Facts, which is connected to his website. His senior project is made up of 2 distinct areas of inquiry, but are informed, that definitely inform each other. Truth's Hip Hop Education Program is a digitally based project showcasing teaching techniques and discussions around the pedagogy of hip hop education. The content of this curriculum is one of the features from his website, trueflowingwithfacts.com. His intention is to apply techniques he has developed within the K-12 classroom. In addition to the Hip Hop Education Project, Truth has been developing the Antioch College Afro-American Studies Institute project, an oral history podcast about the Antioch College African-American Studies Institute, AASI, which was launched in 1968. Designed as a college within a college, it was created by Black students to critically address the college's curriculum, lack of diversity based on its reliance upon a Eurocentric focus, as well as to expand said curriculum to include courses relevant to the Black experience in history, sociology, and political science. Truth's overall goal with this two-part capstone was to develop the findings of his research and practice into a business model for hip-hop education. And so, Truth, I'm going to ask you a question to start off, and then I'll let you continue. I want to ask you to talk about the importance of the use of the term hip-hop, with an understanding that some people don't distinguish between the music of rap and hip-hop and do not understand the differences.
Okay, so rap is just one of the elements of hip-hop. Hip-hop has 5 elements. These elements took shape in and around the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Most would agree it happened in the Bronx, I guess we would say. These elements, most people know one is rap, another one is graffiti or the art aspect of it. Another one is breakdancing, and another, and I just got into a debate with one of my friends earlier today about this too. So, and one is breakdancing, and then the other one is graffiti, DJing with the turntables. And then after that, there's the 5th element of hip hop, of knowledge. Me and my friend were debating if beatboxing should be in there somewhere. You know, and I was like, the 5th element is already in like question, but it's there though. Like, you know, and it's pretty much agreed that knowledge is in there, and hip hop is a culture. I'm an older student. I have friends that are like doctors and like different things like that. And I always say that they're like hip hop doctors. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the way they carry themselves, the way they talk. Some of the jokes they make, which kind of ties it into with what I noticed while interviewing the students from the 60s and the 70s, was like they still had this way that they talked, they still had this demeanor, the way they carried themselves, you know, and that's kind of what hip hop is to me. It's why you tie your shoes the way you tie your shoes, certain things that you say, and it's important to distinguish it from rap because there's so much more expression that's found in that culture. And my goal is to take what the students already know and like empower them through that. So like students are already memorizing the latest top rap albums. When I was younger, I memorized LL Cool J's I'm Bad album. We did all of the songs because everybody wanted to do I'm Bad, so you had to know all the other ones just so that you could actually do one. You know what I'm saying? So like that was at a very young age that I knew all those songs, you know? And so I know that the memory is there. So if my vision was if you could put things that they needed to know, the scientific method, different things that would be the same regardless of what school the person went to, you know, even if it's some principles of life that you could put in there. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Peace.
Yeah, I'm really interested too in, because the pandemic kind of interrupted some of what you were doing also, because you had planned to work in the classroom with the curriculum that you're developing. So I'd really like to hear about how you were able to kind of shift focus, and also how these other elements of your self-design come in, because you also have the work that you've done with the Prison Justice Initiative. So I'm interested in seeing, you know, how all of these three elements came into play, especially after the disruption of the pandemic.
I have an idea for something in the future with the prison justice that I haven't, me and Mary talked about it, but I haven't really moved on it. And that's connecting the parents and the students together in some way. But it was interesting going into the classroom and seeing that, you know, like Mr. Grudgel that I work with, he allowed me to come in his classroom, and it was surprising to see how instantly the students understood what I was trying to do. And they had experienced it before. There was a teacher that taught them about Mesopotamia, and we found the song, we played it, and they instantly had just like total recall of everything that wasn't even in the rap. It was just the fact that there was enough there that they could just tell us all this stuff, you know. And we started experimenting with beats. He said everybody was, and it's like Kung Fu fighting, and we was like, but where'd you get it from, you know? And so then we found that like certain things are passed on, you know, and like it earns its own legend within its, you know, within its time, which that's really hip hop, because that comes to the sagging of the pants, different little words that my brother says, that I'm like, nah, we made that. No, he thinks they made that. We sagged because we didn't want to flood unless you was Michael Jackson. And my brother says it's for another reason. And so, you know, there's this, but there's still something there, you know what I'm saying? All right, so COVID knocks me out. I wanted to make a mixtape, and I'm still gonna work on that. With the students, actually, though, make a couple of songs. We worked on some things like, what's her name? Mary Had a Little Lamb, different little rap songs like that. But I wanted to do something more meaningful, but what I ended up doing was podcasts, because I do a lot of podcasts with my friends. We do podcasts on films, Black issues, everything we could talk about. And that would be a way for me to get some of my friends that don't rap, but that have some of the same ideas, some that are teachers, and everyone into the classroom, or into the conversation. The goal is, I seen someone mention stems on there. The goal is to use every bit of hip hop to express these things. Like the turntable itself deals with revolutions. There's mathematics that can be found in there. You want to keep everybody moving, so there's exercise that can be found in there. So yeah, I mean, I think all of that, there's something, I do believe there's something in all of it. You know, I mean, peace.
Yeah, I want to throw in too, I was just listening to your podcast today, your discussions around Vanilla Ice, and listening to the other people who you're talking to. Kind of, the conversation was really interesting because you're talking about being there and having that mantle, but not being part of it, being invited in. And the conversation was very, I mean, I would really ask people to go to your website and listen to those podcasts, because there's just so much in there related to what you're trying to do, and also related to going back to the Afro-American Studies Institute. So I think we're just about wrapped up. But
we got seconds, but just one thing, because I see Vanilla Ice. Vanilla Ice was the very first CD that I ever purchased with my own money, I will admit.
Thank you, Casselli. Thank you, Truth. If you can stay on, we'd love to have some discussion around this. There's plenty of questions in the comments we'll come back to at the end. Thank you both so much. Next up, and we are tracking right on time, thanks to everyone. Next up is Nadia, who will be introduced by Forrest.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, technical issues. I've been privileged to teach Nadia for a number of years now. After she transferred to Antioch from Ohio University. And Nadia is an artist. And I'm going to put a link to a portfolio of her work. I think it's really best if you see her work. It really does. It really transcends words and speech. It's a different thing. Hold on one second. I'm gonna post it. Nadia has been working on images centered around memory, her own specific memories, and I'm gonna let Nadia take over, and I'm gonna post the images so you can see them. Thank you.
Oh, do I just unmute myself? Is that how that works? Cool.
Yes, Nadia, all the participants are co-hosts, so you can unmute yourself.
Ah, great. Cool. Yeah, so I had a completely different project in mind before everything happened, and then was really kind of grasping at straws trying to figure out what I wanted to do after the other project that I had, which involved collaborating with children, was no longer really possible. And I had started working at the Antioch farm and taking care of the chickens and the geese and the ducks. And the first day that I went there, I picked up this goose egg, and it is huge. It's like just like a massive egg. It's like the biggest egg I'd ever seen. And was so like struck by that, and a cat was like, oh, you should take it home. And my mom showed me how to like blow out the egg on the inside, and she was like, oh, well, you should paint it. Like, of course, like that's what you do. And so I painted a picture of like my bedroom window that's been my bedroom window for pretty much my entire life on the egg, and they just kind of took off from there, and I started painting a lot of different eggs about kind of like being here in the spring, and like the things kind of around me that are so like attached to memories of growing up in Yellow Springs and being here for so long. And then I turned them into animations, and that was a new thing for me. Had never done that before, but Forrest showed me how to do that. So you can see them on the website. If you click the link, they might take a second to load because they're GIFs. But yeah, not really at all what I expected to be doing, but in some ways makes a lot of sense. My mom was telling me that my grandmother used to paint deer bones, and so there's a kind of connection with that. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions. I'm reading some questions. Have you shown the geese your work? Do they seem supportive or indifferent? I have not shown them, and I think they would hiss at me. How do you animate the eggs? So I photographed each side and like turned it ever so slightly and took a new photograph, and then like uploaded them all into Photoshop, and each photograph becomes a frame in the animation. What will happen with the eggs? That's a good question. I don't know. Right now, I'll show you where they are right now. They're just right here. That's only some of them, but yeah. Oh, talk about the dead animals you found. Oh, well, yeah, this spring I found a lot of dead animals, and then friends of mine also found a lot of dead animals, and it just seemed very strange. And like I remember finding a deer and a fish and a dead bird all in the same day, and it was really felt weird. And I think that also had to do with like kind of the whole town being shut down, and the strangeness of that as well. As an educator, do such projects lead you to teaching, to thinking about teaching? can you talk about the experience with the eggs breaking in your pockets? I put an egg, a robin's egg in my pocket, and Tom told me not to put it in my pocket, and I broke it. And then the next day, I put an egg in my pocket. It was a chicken egg, and I was in a situation in which I didn't have a place to put the egg, so I had to put it in my pocket, and then I broke it, and it got all over everywhere, and it was really very messy. And I just felt like it was like such a weird sort of like repetitive thing, and it's kind of like indicative of the kind of experience of like being kind of shut in my house for a long time. And yeah, it in some ways has felt kind of like Groundhog Day, things happening over and over again. Yeah. I'm trying to read to see if there's other questions. Oh, Rick's question. As an educator, do such projects lead you to thinking about teaching? Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how I work with children and kind of like translating that to myself. And I think how I work with children, how I've made art with children has been a lot about like listening to what they're interested in and like sort of encouraging that and nurturing that. And I often don't do that with myself and kind of don't give myself space to explore things. And so I think this was kind of an exercise in allowing myself to do something that maybe didn't make a whole lot of sense or anything, but I felt really drawn to. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I know that we can see your animations at the digital exhibit. I hope everyone finds a moment to click over. I believe the link is in the chat. And thank you, Forrest, for the introduction. We are, next up is Adam. Apologies, Adam. We are out of order, but right back to order. Adam will be introduced by Sean.
Right. I'm happy to introduce Adam Green. Adam's self-designed major is a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Ecological Economics. Adam's senior project is titled Economic Inequality, Racial Segregation, and Environmental Degradation, an Analysis of Environmental Hazards in Ohio Communities. And so Adam and I talked about doing this as a little bit of a conversation. So we're gonna follow that format. So Adam, why don't you tell us about your research and what drove you to look for environment?
Yeah, so my first time like studying inequality directly was in an independent study we did in my third year, where we were looking at the relationships between economic inequality and voter participation. And I find inequality an interesting variable to work with in statistics because it's kind of abstract. You see indications of inequality or cases of inequality in real life, but it's hard to like imagine numerically. I also took a few social science classes related to like the environment in my third year, and I found those interesting. So I wanted to find a way to apply like environmental justice and ecological economics to a quantitative research project. And we came across this article by James Boyce where he hypothesizes that inequality causes environmental degradation. And so that kind of helped us direct our focus with the project.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your research question and what your hypotheses were.
Yeah, so we had two main hypotheses with this. One of them was that populations with higher with higher racial minority population, higher high school dropout rates, and lower income were going to be at high risk of toxin exposure in the environment. And then regions with greater inequality would be at higher risk of toxin exposure as well. And that's based on Boyce's hypothesis of environmental degradation.
And so what did you measure with, when you were talking about toxin exposure, what did you actually measure for that?
Yeah, so we used data from the EPA's Toxic Release Inventory, or TRI. And the TRI logs every facility in the country that releases toxic compounds like lead or nickel. And so that was basically functioning as our dependent variable. And we measured demographic variables and inequality using US Census data. And some of our independent variables included the Black population of the tracts as a percent of the whole population of the tracts. And I'm speaking about census tracts here. We also, another independent variable was the median income of census tracts and the high school dropout rate of census tracts. And our dependent variable for all of these models was the presence or absence of a TRI facility in tracts. We also included measures of economic inequality and racial segregation at the metropolitan level. Yeah. So our results showed that the tracts with lower median income and higher high school dropout rates were significantly more likely to contain TRI facilities. And we also found a surprising relationship between the Black population of tracts and facility presence, where there was a slight but significant decrease in probability of TRI facility presence in urban and suburban tracts with larger Black populations. But in rural Ohio tracts, there was a steep and significant increase in probability of facility presence in tracts with larger Black populations. And none of our inequality measures at the metropolitan level really affected our models in any significant way.
So how do you think we could expand this work in the future?
Right, so one of the ways that we could expand it is by just measuring a larger area. So I was only looking at the state of Ohio in this. And so doing a study of several cities or states would probably better capture the effect of economic inequality and racial segregation, which are kind of larger, they play out at a larger geography, I think. So yeah, that would probably be the main improvement I would add to this study.
And what do you want people to take away from this work, from this study?
Right. So even though we weren't able to find evidence for Boyce's hypothesis, which was that environmental degradation was caused by inequality, our results do clearly show that the risk of exposure is higher in economically disadvantaged communities and in rural Black communities. It's also worth noting the major geographic segregation of Black people in Ohio, where over 60% of rural Ohio tracts have essentially no Black people living in them. And you can see this mapped out on my Colloquia page and in my presentation. And our results confirm what a wealth of previous environmental justice research has shown in other regions, which is that in Ohio right now, the health and safety of communities is dependent on race and class. So yeah, that's what I would say is the biggest takeaway from this study.
All right. And I would encourage everybody, if you want to see the wonderful maps that Adam created and more charts and statistics, particularly from this work, to go to the Colloquia site and watch his more formal presentation that he pre-recorded there. But there's a lot of questions in the chat, so time to take a few.
Yeah.
Right.
Karen Forwright asked about causality, the direction of causality, and whether you think that you've been able to determine that.
Right. So I know that a lot of the first environmental justice studies were looking at particularly the siting of toxic waste facilities in like Black neighborhoods. And so there's a clear sort of causality or like direction there where there is a Black community and then they choose to disproportionately put toxic sites in that community. And so I think in order to like provide evidence for that direction of causality, we would have to use time series data, which would be another really interesting addition to the study and would involve comparing basically different, comparing the change over time of demographics in areas and presence and absence of these facilities.
That ties in with the question from Kim Landsberger about what time span did your study encompass, and do you think the trends you found might change with time?
Right. So our all of our demographic data and EPA data were from 2018, so it's pretty recent. And yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, if Boyce's hypothesis that this is all sort of based around is that inequality causes environmental degradation. I go more into sort of the mechanisms of that in my presentation. But basically, I would think that if that hypothesis is true, that if inequality increases in Ohio, that we would also expect to see increased environmental degradation in communities.
Brooke, in terms of time, how are we with time?
1 minute and that's actually up. Perfect timing. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Sean. I can't wait to see your full project. It's amazing quantitative work. Next up is Zoe, introduced by Catalina.
Okay, sound is on. Y'all can hear me? Okay, great. It's a pleasure today to introduce Zoe Ritzhaupt, who I've worked closely with the past 2 years in 4 or 5 classes, as well as outside of Antioch. They're a filmmaker and photographer from Piqua, Ohio. They're a documentarian interested in recording the milestones and tribulations associated with coming of age And they really want to preserve moments in time, as you'll see today. They additionally explore their own personal history and conflicts through narrative filmmaking. Their most recent project is Population 20,000. It's a documentary investigating Piqua, Ohio's stagnant, Piqua, Ohio, and its stagnant population size. Outside of media, Zoe has an interest in punk music and history, and queer activism, gardening. They play bass in the Antioch band Captain Scrummy, as well as in the Columbus queer core group Sprout and the Money Spell. And I will send a link here to the website designed by Forrest Bright with Zoe's sort of a teaser preview of this work in progress. Zoe, shall I let you take it from here?
Yeah, hi. So Population 20,000 kind of came about halfway through the spring term. You know, my plan had to change a couple times thanks to coronavirus. I originally had plans to make a narrative film, a comedy mockumentary style film. And I actually started filming it right at the very end of winter term. And then with everything moving online, I switched to Population 20,000, which is this documentary. And so Piqua is a town of about 20,000 people. It's fairly blue collar. It's small, conservative. It's about 45 minutes north of Dayton. I was born and raised here. I'm here again now. I wanted to explore as to why the population size hasn't changed since about 1950. We've been stuck at 20,000 since. And, you know, we've lost a lot of industry and factories that were here, and all the jobs kind of have dried up and disappeared. So I've spent the past couple months cold calling people off of like my Facebook's friends list and other people that I knew who had grown up in the area and interviewing them. And then just like driving around and getting different footage of town. I'm also using some archive footage that I got from the library here in town, productions that were done in the 50s and 60s. And I'm still in the process of making the film. I didn't have enough time over the course of this quarter to finish it entirely. So hopefully it'll be done by September, and the full piece will be online and available.
Are we gonna see the whole film now, Zoe, in April, like the whole teaser, or should we let people do that on their own time?
Yeah, the teaser is available on the Colloquia site that Catalina sent to the group chat. I know Zoom's a little jumpy with trying to play video. So if people haven't checked it out, I guess they can do that on their own time, because the piece is about 5 minutes long.
That's what I would recommend, since we're on a schedule, so people can watch that there on their own.
Cool. So Zoe, you did about 7, or how many hours of interviews have you done?
So as of right now, I think I have about 8 interviews, and each of them went about an hour, hour and a half long. So I have around 8 to 9 hours of just interviews that I've gone through. And then I also have an additional probably 3 hours of B-roll and extra footage from around town. So lots of hours to dig through and organize.
Right. And you have like, you're not indifferent to Piqua, you have like feelings about this place, and yet you're trying to make a documentary that doesn't only reflect your own sort of disdain in a way, right?
Yeah, you know, Piqua has always been a place that I've viewed as something I should escape from. Like, you know, after I graduate college, I really just want to get away from here and go somewhere else in the world. So I wanted to, and this was something that Julia Reichart and Steve had mentioned in a class that we had earlier this quarter about avoiding making propaganda in documentary filmmaking. So I'm trying to keep my own voice out of it as much as I can, but thus far, and you can kind of see that in the preview that I've put out that most people don't feel very positive about the area. You know, Piqua very stagnant. There's not very many jobs. There's not very much recreation to do. You know, our mall has about 4 stores in it. Whenever I was 7, we probably had over 20. So things are definitely slowing down around here.
Yeah, it seems like what's wrong with Piqua, right? It's like what's wrong. It's a microcosm of a larger question. I see a couple questions. Have you met Julia Reichert? I think you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I've met her in person once, and I've had 1 or 2 classes with her and Steve in it.
So what sort of like style do you see yourself? Sorry, there are people here and they don't realize I'm talking right now. I've got to tell them to. What? Hey, you guys! I'm live here on Zoom. So, what sort of style do you see yourself like having like studied with someone like Julia Reichert, studied, you know, finding your own voice, and you're making a documentary? Do you see yourself like as a lyrical filmmaker, or are you trying to get like, do you want to collaborate with scientists? You know, I'm just going to let Kevin Magruder take this question. That's a lot better question. Considering the loss of jobs, why do you think the population of Piqua didn't decline from 20,000?
I think most people work outside of Piqua. So the county seat is in Troy, which is about 20 minutes south. And then there's also Sydney, which is just north of here. And they have a lot more job opportunities. But I know people will also drive down to Huber Heights in the Dayton area for work. So Piqua is kind of just like a neighborhood to live in. You know, it's fairly cheap. But I think most of the people that live here are older people. So the older population has stayed. I think most people around my age and a little bit older are moving out, except for wealthier families. And this is something that one of my interviewees had mentioned, that wealthier families that kind of have more control in Piqua stay, and then their kids kind of keep the control over those few businesses in town.
And what Rob Hollister asked, what would we like the future of Piqua to be, and can that be achieved?
I think that depends on who you're talking to. You know, I would like to see it progress out of the conservative pocket a little bit more. You know, you drive around town, you see lots of Confederate flags, lots of Trump signs. I would like there to be, but I think that that's also a lack of access to education. The school system isn't super well funded in Piqua. Census had shown that it was a 95% white community. So there's not very much diversity here either. So there'd need to be more people moving into Piqua. And I just don't see that happening until we start seeing more jobs and independent businesses here.
John Knox, Zoe, has the filmmaking helped you see your home place more clearly? I'm also a rural Ohio boy, but it is 6:30, so I don't know. And I'm also wondering if there were any of these what are they called? Toxic release inventory sites there.
I don't know anything about the TRIs.
Okay.
Zoe, thank you so much. Catalina, thank you so much. I think it's resounding through the text. We cannot wait to watch, and we look forward to the full feature. Thank you so much for talking about your work today. Next up is Alexander, introduced by Marianne.
Hi, everyone. My name's Marianne Davis. I'm Assistant Professor of Western Literature here at Antioch College, and I have the great pleasure of introducing my advisee, Alexander Schlosser, who will be graduating with his self-designed BA entitled Deconstructing the Self. He's done a lot of coursework in literature, art, and life. And I really have to say it's Michael Casselli who has done most of the work with Alexander on his capstone project, which is entitled Dirty Laundry. And it's a sculptural installation. It's combining dirty sheets, written narrative, and I'm gonna let him tell you a little bit about his projects. So Alexander.
Thank you, hello. Yeah, so I created an installation for my senior capstone. I wish you all could be here to actually walk around, but since you're not, I guess I'll just walk around with you guys. Let me turn my camera around. Okay, so I asked my friends to sleep with sheets for about a month. I wanted to then dye them and kind of see what impressions were created by people's fluids and just like whatever people kind of have in their beds getting onto their sheets. And this is actually my favorite one. I don't know how well you can see it, but you can see like different stains of whatever these people had in their bed. And yeah, so I'm walking you guys around. There are a bunch of them. After I dyed them, I then took the dye water or the bath water and created a wash to then write a narrative on the wall. And it's very light, and it's supposed to be light. It's not supposed to be easy to read. It's also supposed to just kind of fade over time. So yeah, I don't know what else to really tell you guys. So I guess I would like questions maybe.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how COVID-19 changed your project, because like especially our art majors, you know, the stay-at-home orders and the quarantine has affected a lot of their projects. So if you could say a little bit about that.
Great. So it didn't change it too much, actually. I was much more careful with the sheets once I got them back. So I mean, wearing gloves and using a mask. And I guess in its original conception, I was going to make everybody sheets. I was going to get some cotton muslin and just sew them myself and pass them out to people. But with everything going on, it was difficult to kind of acquire that material. And I ended up just asking people to, like, if they were capable or if they wanted to just go ahead and buy their own sheets, sleep with them, and then send them to me. And that's why I have so few of them. I really wanted the entire room to kind of be full of them, but I am pretty happy with what's going on here, so.
So Shay Mayer and Jennifer Winker and Adam Green asked a similar question, if you could read some of the narrative or an excerpt of the narrative.
That's a great question. So I don't want to read it. So whenever I was like the narrative itself it's my experience with sexual abuse and just sexual violence. And whenever I was trying to construct it, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to kind of write something brand new and write something fresh. And I was going through my Google Drive and just kind of being nostalgic because I'm about to graduate, and I've had that for almost 8 years now. And so there's just a lot of stuff piled up in it. And I kept finding these, like these 1, 2, 3 sentence, just expressions. They were like kind of desperate attempts to say whatever I was trying to say. And I was like trying to make it so perfect. Like I thought that if I made it perfect enough, then it would, I don't know, be cathartic. And I don't know, I kind of I forgot about them and I never let them really exist. And so my reasoning behind like presenting it in this way is to just allow it to exist in the space. I'm not really interested in really interacting with these words anymore. It's kind of like now that they're here, and that's really it. Which is also why I'm disappointed that people aren't here, because I guess that's another way that COVID has affected it, because I really expected people to interact with it themselves and kind of come to their own conclusions.
There are three questions that kind of get to some of that. From Laura Midius, she's asking, how do you relate the sheets to the text? And then Michael Casselli asks, can you talk a little bit about the site and what part it plays in the overall work? And Michelle Deleon asks, was there a reason you decided to use the color yellow?
So the sheets, this is actually like an expansion on a project that I was going to do with Michael Casselli, like in one of his classes back in 2016. Sheets are just like, the idea of sheets being on a line, like in the summer and you're a kid and you're just kind of running through those and they're kind of wet and they kind of caress you and hold you, and I don't know, it was just a memory that I really enjoy and really appreciate. And also, sheets are very intimate. They're an intimate part of somebody's life, I think. Because they're just all the things that you do in your bed, I guess. So I thought sheets were appropriate. I chose the color yellow because I thought it would look best in this space. And the space is the old art building on campus. I don't know if people can have recognized it yet. But I like this building because it is kind of old and it's being unused, but I think it's really, really pretty. It gets a lot of light. So because I didn't reinforce the dye with any sort of solvents, the sun is going to bleach them over time and they'll just be, I mean, I don't think they'll ever be entirely white ever again, but they'll slowly fade just like the words that I've written on the walls.
And Brooke asks, why call it Deconstructing the Self?
Because I had to pick something. I don't know, I guess it just kind of made sense because I felt like my time at Antioch was doing a lot of internal work. Just kind of figuring out how I relate to myself and relate to people, because some of the experiences that I'm trying to interact with this project have made I don't know, interacting with the world really difficult. And so just trying to get a better understanding of myself has been important to me. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot while being at Antioch, but that's something that I'm really grateful for. So I think it seemed appropriate.
I'm just going to ask really quick, I'm kind of jumping in here. Can you talk about what you used to write the words with?
Yeah, I used a paintbrush and the bath water that I used to dye the sheets. I created a wash, like you see this paint that I've painted on the floor, just kind of like to accent the lines. I combined the bath water, quote unquote, with the rest of this paint, just so that I could get it to stick on the wall, really.
Shay Mayer asked, is there a way that people in Yellow Springs might be able to interact with the piece?
I hope so. I mean, I'm not taking it down myself, so it'll be up forever. I mean, not forever, until somebody else decides to take it down, I guess. But I'm not sure how I would organize some sort of way for people to actually interact with it, but I'm open to ideas because I would like that.
Thank you, Alexander. It's very powerful. Thank you, Casselli. Thank you, Marianne. I hope that we can announce some way that people might be able to come on a schedule to view it. It's really quite incredible.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Chris, introduced by Bryan.
Hi all, can you hear me? We're all there? Okay, great. Well, I'm Bryan Kotz. I'm Assistant Professor of Biology and Environmental Science at the college. And it's an honor to introduce Chris. He came to us from one of the larger state schools in the region. and is now finishing his Bachelor of Science with a focus on French. His self-design major combines journalism and environmental science with a focus on environmental law and its processes and mechanisms. He's done some really cool co-ops at some law firms. He's been the editor of multiple publications on campus. And as you'll hear shortly, he has recently accepted a position as an environmental journalist at WISO. So congratulations to him for that. In addition, he has also been offered or has accepted a position in the law program at Drexel University and may exercise that option sometime in the future. So I guess without further ado, just want to hand the microphone to Chris and tell him that I'm proud of him. He persevered. He's a very good problem solver. And I see Chris becoming a leader in the environmental field in the future. Take it away, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about my senior project. I did a legal review of a case in Mad River Township, which is about 2 miles north of Yellow Springs. There is a mining company that purchased 420 acres of farmland, and they're hoping to convert it to a sand, gravel, and limestone mine. And there has been sort of this community reaction to it from a group called Citizens Against Mining. It's mostly adjacent landowners. They have about 250 members, but they have like a core group of 12 people who have really taken it pretty seriously. And my project was basically about the ways that they have been fighting this mining company and preventing them from starting the mining operation. So it's kind of a three-pronged thing. So we have the first thing they did is they filed an appeal when the Ohio Department of Natural Resources provided a surface mining permit to this company. And I decided to look into that appeal because it's the most recent legal filing. So I kind of just analyzed it. It was a 50-page document, and it had a lot of what was going on and what the concerns were. So I guess I don't want to go too long here, but I think one of the most important concerns and something that's relevant to Yellow Springs is groundwater, right? So the area around Yellow Springs, we have we have a lot of springs, Yellow Springs, Springfield, and there's karst formations, which is basically underneath the ground. It's like a cavernous. So it's, there's holes and the water can move through there pretty quickly. And with this limestone mining process, when you have to dewater, you have to take that water out in order to get the limestone out. And so one of the big concerns that this organization had was what the groundwater, how that would change, how their well levels would change, and then if that water would be contaminated. So within this legal suit, a lot of the argument was about if there were karst formations or not. And the company, they would have liked it if there were not karst formations, because then there would be less of an effect on the groundwater. So a lot of what the case was it was really this argument about things like flow rate and things like levels of wells in the area. And, I kind of looked at the literature, the scientific literature, to see what, both what the company was claiming and then also what the Citizens Against Mining group was claiming, and to see if there were things that reinforced it, and to see if, there were additional things. And, I basically came to the conclusion that a lot of the time there were some holes in the story that the mining company put forth. And they hired a geologist to look at these things, and so did Citizens Against Mining, the local nonprofit group. And the back and forth was very interesting. And it's still not resolved, which is kind of interesting and kind of makes it difficult. But I'm glad that I have this new position at WISO, because I've been able to kind of follow the story as it evolves. So this legal, this document that I reviewed was from November, and there's been, and the coronavirus has delayed all this as well, but there's been nothing in the case since then. So I think it really kind of shows how it's possible to delay these things and also make it really difficult for large companies that are trying to change landscapes, just by doing your research and challenging what they do. There have been comments by the Ohio EPA. They've said, this is an unusual case because there's pushback, and these citizens really, they have hired attorneys, but by themselves, they've looked through these reports that the company has put forward, and they've critiqued it. And they've been able to, the property was purchased in 2015, and they've been able to delay the start of mining. And at this point, I'd say it's a toss-up. It's a 50-50 chance. The company has a lot of things they have to prove to the Ohio EPA and to the ODNR and to the Clark County Court of Common Pleas before they're going to be able to start mining there. So that's a bit of an overview. I see I have some questions here, and I think the rest of my time might be well spent doing that. So I don't know.
Lou Trelawney Cassidy asked whether the company that's doing this mining is different from Chemex.
Yeah, they are. They are different from Chemex. They're Enon Sand and Gravel, and they're a subsidiary of Jurgensen Company, which is a big infrastructure company in Cincinnati. Jurgensen, it's funny, when I was working on this project, I saw them paving the road right on Quarry Street. So they're certainly well used in this area.
And then David Kamler asked whether you've had a chance to share your work with Peter Townsend.
Yeah, so Peter Townsend helped me and advised me on this project. He helped me with some of the geology things. He helped me locate resources in the OKL. So he's under the acknowledgements on my poster. Yeah.
Has this, as other people might put in questions, has this been featured on Why? So I heard the tail end of a story, and it sounds like it. Was that your story?
Yeah, it was. I did a little tiny story about not the case that I did my senior project on, but there's a private lawsuit where 4 of the landowners are, they're suing the mining company, but they're suing them related to interpretation of Ohio Revised Code in terms of zoning. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to force the company to get a conditional use permit to do this mining with the county, because they believe that the 5-person Clark County board would not approve it. At the moment, pending litigation, the company has, they sued the county, and the county ended up settling and basically making it so they would not have to do a conditional use permit. So that's what's pressing right now. At the end of July is when that case will resume trial. The first 2 days of trial happened on March 15th and 16th. Coronavirus hit, and it's been delayed, over 4 months. So yeah, I have been reporting on it, and I will hopefully continue to report on it.
And then Lou asked a question about what are the barriers to people, the opponents of the mining company, keeping up that pressure for 5 years? Like how?
Money. So they, I will say this is a group of people that are upper middle class. They have some means. A lot of them are attorneys, executives. So they're able to put money forward at their own money. They're fundraising maybe around $40,000, $50,000 a year through their organization. But I mean, this company has put millions into legal fees and research. And I mean, the company's having 1,000-page geologist reports. So money is the main barrier. Honestly, I've been surprised at how easy it is through the Ohio EPA and the ODNR for there to be community input. But the issue is money, and the company is willing to play the long game because it's going to be 50, 60 years for them to mine all 420 acres. So they can wait another 5 years if they have to. And I should also say this population that lives in this area, they're aging, they're mostly retired. So they're upper middle class retirees who have time to do this. The question is, are their kids going to want to do that?
Right. And then Brooke asks, what is special about the nexus of environmental science and environmental law?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I never really have, worked I always wanted to work in an environmental law firm, but I never really had the chance. But I did get to work with litigators, and so I've seen kind of those strategies, and the office that they're working with that they've hired is called Fair Shake Environmental Services. And they're this company, they're a law firm that basically they fundraise enough and they have enough means that they can represent small cases like this. But it's tricky to say because a lot of environmental law, as you'll see, the companies that are representing the mining company, the firms, that they call themselves environmental lawyers too.
And actually, the third part of that was, which I left out, was reporting environmental law and environmental science.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too. yeah, I think the biggest thing with reporting with law and science is just learning how to communicate it in a way that people understand. And especially on the radio, it's been helpful to learn from people because, like Nina Ellis, because they can tell you how to kind of dumb it down a little bit. So not dumb it down, but make it so someone who's driving in their car or doing something else can understand. And that's been a real challenge. And my paper is really not a representation of good science communications because it's kind of technical and heavy, but I wanted to do that because I felt like it deserved that. But yeah, I think when you're trying to communicate things like science and law, that it's a different thing than doing like a review paper like I did today.
Chris, so proud of your work and the ways that you found this interstice so productive to figure out how to play in. We can all follow Chris in his new Reporting for America job at WYSO. Also, congratulations on law school.
Thank you.
And finally, we are to the end of the alphabet. And next up is Ben, introduced by Marianne.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to introduce Ben Zeitzman. I feel that Ben is part of my year. We came to Antioch together. He's going to be graduating with a BA in American Literature and American Religious Traditions. His capstone is entitled Bad Books About Big Ideas, Literary Realism and the Liberal Tradition. And if you know anything about Ben, he's the best person to talk about his work. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Hello. When I came here, saw a poster. I remember it hanging on the low wall in front of the Olive Kettering Library, but it may have been on McGregor. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, on this poster was printed a quote. It's from Toni Cade Bambara, although online you'll occasionally see it attributed to Audre Lorde, but she didn't say it. And it is, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And when I saw that, I thought, my goodness, I really disagree with that. And then I started writing about not just why I disagreed with it, but why people agreed with it. And it sort of propelled itself from there. I'm working on turning this into a book manuscript. It's about 2/3 of the way finished, in addition to Marianne's help. I just this week sort of brought on a writer named Vincent Cunningham, who writes for The New Yorker and is professor at Sarah Lawrence and has written a lot about James Baldwin, and another professor and writer named Michael Cunningham, who is the senior lecturer in creative writing at Yale and has tackled a lot of different questions about identity and its intersection with the literary realist tradition. I am going to read you an excerpt of my paper now. When I was 23 years old, I read a novel by Bernard Malamud, whom I had until then dismissed as a baseball writer. It was called The Fixer, and it took place in Tsarist Russia just before the revolution. This is initially what drew me to it. It seemed like a radical departure from the baseball diamonds of the natural, and I was curious to see what the constants in Malamud's writing were, to see what a writer carried with him between books so seemingly different. I understood Malamud to be a Jewish writer, too. That he'd written a novel about New York baseball in the mid-20th century confirmed this understanding rather than complicating it. For many years, some of American baseball's most ardent fans were American Jews. It was initially one of the ways they culturally assimilated. Still, I understood Malamud to be a Jewish writer in the same way Harold Brodkey and Gordon Lish are Jewish writers, which is to say, informed by the Jewish experience and influenced by the Jewish sensibility, and there is such a thing, but not actually concerned with Judaism itself. I was wrong. The Fixer is about Yaakov Bok, a pathetic, hapless man in a dreary Ukrainian town who scrounges together a living by fixing things. He's better educated than many of the Jews who subsist in the town's ghetto. He is at least literate, and he carries around a book of selections from Spinoza with him. But unlike some Russians, and Ukraine was at the time part of Russia, which accounts for the definite article that you still often hear before its name, he is strenuously apolitical. as Yakov sees it, discussions about anti-Semitism and Tsarist repression are good only for inviting anti-Semitism and Tsarist repression. So he's determined to stay out of trouble, and he does not. Yakov Bach never does anything to incur the wrath of Gentiles, and that's probably the most important fact in The Fixer. He never looks for trouble, it just finds him anyway. So one day, a Ukrainian boy from the town is found murdered. At the boy's funeral, leaflets reading, "We accuse the Jews," are distributed, and here there's a note which reads, "This comes as no surprise to anybody, least of all the accused. Tsarist Russia in the years of the early 20th century was as anti-Semitic an environment as any the world has ever known. It was home to pogroms, the Pale of Settlement, and the protocols of the elders of Zion. Violence against Russian Jews was commonplace and was often incited by what's come to be known as blood libel, which is the then oft-repeated accusation that Jews need the blood of Gentile children to make matzah, a kind of sacramental unleavened bread eaten during Passover. The ingredients of matzah, by the way, are flour and water. There is no blood. So soon editorials running in the newspaper saying that they have to be killed, the Jews. Skipping ahead here real quick, basically Bach gets imprisoned. It's not good. So what's really interesting about this is that Malamud writes most of this from Bach's perspective in prison, 200 pages in the same room. And not only does he understand the psychological conditions of imprisonment, as well as Arthur Koestler, who was the stern poet laureate of the falsely accused, but he demonstrates this understanding in prose that achieves a level of austere beauty that Darkness at Noon, Kessler's book, never approaches. There is here one more footnote. I am so sorry. Malamud is as convincing as Koestler on the subject is especially remarkable because Koestler actually served time as a political prisoner. Koestler did, managed to simultaneously infuriate Nazi Germany, the USSR, and France's Third Republic so much that they all issued warrants for his arrest at the same time, which takes some doing. Because in the late 30s, the Ribbentrop Pact hadn't yet been signed. They were very disparate. The French ultimately caught up with him and threw him in jail. Malamud, meanwhile, got his master's at Columbia, worked for the US Census Bureau, and spent the rest of his life as a lit professor at Oregon State. And I think The Fixer is interesting in that it really complicates this idea of the importance of staying in one's lane as a writer. I think that it is often a socially responsible thing to do and is often a artistically craven thing to do. So what happens is, throughout the course of the novel, nothing changes except Yakov himself. He realizes it is impossible to be an apolitical Jew. I can't keep reading this. I'm at 10 minutes. Questions? Bob liked to teach second-rate novels. Did that influence you? I took Bob's course on second-rate novels. Is an independent study. It influenced me profoundly, that course did. And you know, Fogarty's fingerprints are all over this thing. They really, really are. When I mentioned Brodkin, Gordon Lish as exemplars of the kind of Jewish writing I was talking about, both are Antioch Review contributors. Lish is on the editorial board. When I talked about American Jewry in baseball, that is a Fogarty topic. And I talked a little bit about how political intent can stifle perhaps story. Bob is here in all of our hearts. He is not here in this chat. He does not know what Zoom is, actually. But, and he doesn't want to. But, yeah, I can, Garrett. So that is one of the major themes of this, ultimately. My paper is divided.
Can you repeat Garrett's question for everybody who didn't?
Garrett asked, can I talk a bit about how political intent can sometimes stifle story? And my paper is divided into two sections. The first is about identity in literary realism. The second is about ideology in literary realism, which is where I handle political intent. And in that second section, I look at 4 Russian novels from the mid-19th century dealing with the events of 1848. Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done, Harrison's Who Is to Blame, Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, and finally, Tolstoy's Anna Karenina and War and Peace. The trouble is this. Literary realism lives, this is an argument that I make. When I initially started reading these, I thought that literary realism was an unwilling vector for certain ideologies. I looked at Ayn Rand, I looked at the socialist realism of Gorky, and here in the US, Mike Gold, and I thought, well, these people are hacks. It must be something about the novel. I had it wrong. Literary realism in that is a vector for ideology and a very good one. But that ideology is liberalism, which the people who work with this are illiberal. And in fact, I make the argument in my paper that the novel was, in art in general, was the key force in shaping liberalism rather than the other way around. It begins with the paintings of Bosch and Peter Bruegel the Elder, who did that sort of thing. And then Montaigne, the essays of Michel Montaigne, really plays a vital role. Montaigne was taken up by Shakespeare, most notably in As You Like It, I discovered. And I found the translation of Montaigne by a Elizabethan writer named John Florio that Shakespeare actually used. And you can see that Shakespeare cribbed line for line from Montaigne's on the inconstancy of our actions. And so the trouble is, literary realism is descriptive, and it is compendious. People in it contradict themselves, are complicated, do not adhere to any particular ideology. And the thing about ideologies both on the left, like Marxism, and on the right, like whatever Ayn Rand gets up to, is that they fundamentally deal in stock characters. They do that because they have to. Individualism in Marxism is anathema. People in Marxist thought are called humanists the same way that in Caitlyn's poem, she calls people douchebags. It is bad. And so the liberal tradition, it turns out, and what we think of, what we've come to think of as good literary fiction, are so inextricably tied. That said, something that complicates this is good science fiction, which often works in allegory and is often an excellent vector for ideology. Ursula Le Guin, people like that, Ballard, Marxists, Iris Murdoch, Marxists, excellent writers and excellent writers of science fiction or fantasy.
Excuse me, Ben, I think Brooke is signaling us.
I'm done. I'm out, I'm done.
Ben, thank you so much. Something tells me that many of us will have plenty of opportunities to read your analysis and your footnotes in the years to come, and I do look forward to that so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you so much. We've exceeded our time today. Thank you for the entire Antioch community coming out for this virtual colloquia to celebrate and highlight the work of our graduating class of 2020. Though these are strange days, we still find ways to gather, and we appreciate you all so very much. We do have a couple students, Michelle and Truth, who could still take questions. I myself will hold the space open for at least another 10 minutes, but for those of you who need to get home underneath this thunderstorm in and around Yellow Springs, again, we thank you for being here with us, and we hope to see you at commencement and out and around town as the world opens back up slowly and carefully. Thank you all so much. Students, you guys you rock. I'm just so happy to be here with all of you. Like my heart's just full to bursting right now. You make this place what it is.
I love you.
I love you too.
Sorry, I just want to say really quick, tonight at 10 o'clock, 10 to midnight, an Antioch adjacent friend in DC is doing a live set on antiwatt.org. Tune in, be there. Tomorrow at 7, another show. If you want to do a show, email anti-watt@antiochcollege.edu. Anybody with a Wi-Fi connection can do a show. Get involved.
Woo!
So good.
Great work, everybody. You did a great job. It's very impressive. So I have all the recording and I have all the chat too. So I'll be able to share that with you guys so you can see all the congratulations and the good wishes that were sent to you in there tonight.
Thank you.
If anyone has any remaining questions for students, you're welcome to pop them up. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I'm just all grins. I'm gonna be all grins the rest of the day and the week. And
one of the earlier questions for Michelle was how would people be able to access your full paper?
That was actually a question that I was asking myself. I will probably put a link up there very soon. Ish. I don't know. Okay, I can't promise that fast, but I still have to flesh out some reflections to put on there. But if you email me personally at Deleon at antiochcollege.edu, I'll do that right now. If you email me personally asking for the paper, I'll send it to you. I think that's like the best way for me at the moment.
Is it accurate that senior projects go into Antioch into the archives?
Sorry?
You know if senior projects go into the archives?
I'm not sure. I think they do. That would be awesome. I'd really like to have that in there.
Yeah. And then for Truth, is Truth still on? There were a couple of comments there.
All right, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Karen Forwright said that there's a professor at University of DC who she wants to connect you with around that he's using hip hop for STEM education there.
Yeah, I think that's a good connect because I'm looking at DC in my future very soon. Yeah.
If anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
I just want to say I was impressed by all the students' work, especially Chris, like, and what he's doing, and like the ability to like actually like because the media is like really important, you know what I'm saying? So he's being able to be a voice. That's pretty dope, you know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
And I look forward to seeing Zoe's work, you know what I'm saying? And wish I could have wrote some poems with Caitlyn type stuff, you know what I'm saying?
And Garrett says that Missions is interested in learning more about everybody's work, particularly Athina. He says, can he be in touch with you about your recommendations?
Sorry. Yes. Yes, of course, Gary. I think it'll be awesome to be able to give this knowledge to Antioch because I feel like it can have a real impact on marginalized, racialized students, and it can start occurring in the fall. So I think that'll be huge.
Athina, if you ever thought your interviews were appropriate for a digital exhibit that people could listen to, you know, in long form, I would love to work with you or to build it out on your behalf with other Antioch specific exhibits. I think your work is so crucially important all the time, but now especially maybe. I just think it's wonderful. Thank you for your work and for helping to make Antioch what it is.
Adam Green asked, is there a way to get Caitlyn's zine? We'll have to figure that out.
I'm not sure. Caitlyn, are you still here? Can you hear?
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. Is there a question?
Yeah, how can we get your poems?
Right now, I have just one physical copy of the book, but I have a PDF that I can send to people, and very soon I'm gonna figure out how to get more physical copies because they're cuter in real life than on the PDF.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can email me if you want the PDF, or like reach out however you know how. And then when a book arrives, you know, I can do that too.
Okay. Well.
So good. Thank you, everyone. We can't wait for commencement.
Thank you, Brooke.
That's right. Well done. That's right. Don't forget, and everybody who's still on the line, there's a watch party for the graduates, friends, and family. So, so that's going to be a good time. I think it'll be similar to this, only we'll have some breakout rooms, I hope, where you guys could go and talk with your friends if you want to during the commencement period. Although I think we'll all be watching the actual live stream, but then afterwards, maybe we could have some social groups or something like that. We'll see. I'll do what I can with trying to move everybody around in this Zoom tool.
That would be wonderful.
Feels a little like a circus act, moving people around into rooms and in and out. But
April,
anyway,
thank you for everything you do. Thank you.
Sure thing, Brooke. It's really great. I mean, you know, I mean, it's great to be able to welcome you into the Alumni Association this way.
It feels like we need even more time with the website, and I'm wondering, Forrest, if there's like a way to add a comment section so that when we actually have time to look through this in detail, we can ask follow-up questions on the website itself.
Cool. Wait, can you repeat that?
Oh, you need me to repeat it? Forrest is saying that he can add a comment section to the Colloquia website, because, you know, 10 minutes is maybe not enough for us to really ask informed questions. So we can go through this and add comments and questions later on to the website.
I see.
The website looks beautiful, by the way.
It really does. Well done, Forrest. And students too. I mean,
It's easy with the beautiful work. Yeah.
Right? So I'll make this recording available to you in a little bit. We'll, we'll think about that. We'll put it up on on one of the YouTube channels so others of your friends and family can see it too.
It was a delight to be here with you all. I'm going to sign out. Hungry dogs. Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night, everybody. We'll see you Saturday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, April.
Sure thing. Have a good time celebrating, seniors.
Definitely. You earned it.
Everyone.